Hello. Today I want to talk about the London coffee houses in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, and a little bit about their relationship to the development of what Habermas has termed the public sphere. Interested viewers can also watch earlier videos I have made on British print culture during this period and on Habermas and the public sphere. I will give the links in the video notes below. Turning first to the coffee houses, it now seems to have been established that the first coffee house in England was established in London in 1652. The counterclaim for a coffee house in Oxford at a similar date has been shown to be weakly based. By the way, the London Coffee House may well have been the first coffee house in Europe outside of the Ottoman Empire, but I think that may be a less well-established claim. The first London coffee vendor was Pasqua Rosé, the Greek servant of a British Levantine merchant from Smyrna, modern Izmir. He opened his coffee house in 1652 at the time of the Commonwealth. Initially little more than a shack, it was located in an alley off Cornhill, close by the Royal Exchange in the business district. The coffee was served Turkish style, sweet and black, and was very popular, with Rosé soon selling over 600 dishes a day. I am reminded of one of my favorite Turkish proverbs, that coffee should be black as hell, strong as death, and sweet as love. Although Londoners initially found this new import strange, Rosé's initiative was soon copied, with a second shop being opened in 1656 on Fleet Street, and by 1663, shortly after the restoration of the monarchy, there were 82 coffee houses within the old city itself, with other shops established in newer districts to the west, like Covent Garden. By the early 18th century, there were more coffee houses in London than in any other European city, second only to Istanbul, the old Constantinople itself. In 1734, for example, a street survey recorded some 551 registered coffee houses in London, whilst unofficial estimates, which included the many unregistered vendors, placed the number at already over 1,000. By contrast, Dutch Amsterdam, London's main rival in international trade, apparently only had 32 coffee houses by 1700. Coffee was often presented as a valuable stimulant to social and intellectual life, firing conversation and debate, sparking ideas, and, as Rosé himself proclaimed in an advertising handbill, it quickened the spirit and made one fit for business. Certainly its effects were quite different from the general drunkenness that was produced by the weak beer, small beer, that was then commonly drunk as a safer alternative to London's notoriously fetid river water. Then as now, the chemical properties of coffee stimulated alertness, Rosé warning that it should not be drunk after supper, as it would hinder sleep for 3 or 4 hours. More significantly, perhaps, the coffee houses provided an early venue for the operation of Habermas's public sphere. That is, the sphere in which private people come together as a public. That is a discursive space separate from both the sphere of public authority, embodied in government and state institutions, and the private sphere of people's private lives of family, friends, and daily life. As Habermas argues, in the public sphere it is possible to openly discuss matters of general public concern and form opinions which may have a wider impact on public policy, coming to define and shape what is increasingly represented as public opinion, separate from and potentially critical of the policies of the government and other authorities. The London coffee houses were multifunctional in this regard, providing both important gathering places for those engaged in business or wanting to discuss the news of the day, but also acting as places of convivial chit-chat. There are obvious parallels with the social uses of the modern internet. In relation to business, it is of note that on Change Alley, what is now Exchange Alley, Jonathan's and later Garraway's coffee houses became early venues for trading in shares and commodities, with John Castaigne publishing formal price lists at Jonathan's from 1698. the first clear evidence for a systematic securities exchange in England. I note that the alley attracted stock jobbers who had been expelled from the Royal Exchange for their rowdiness and unwillingness to be regulated. Significantly, Jonathan's was associated with both the South Sea Bubble of 1720 and the financial panic of 1745. Much later, in 1773, new Jonathan's, built after the old coffee house had been destroyed by fire, became the site for the London Stock Exchange. Again, Lloyd's Coffee House opened on its original site on Tower Street in about 1688, and was popular with ship owners, mariners, and merchants, becoming the site for both reliable shipping news and marine insurance deals, ultimately leading to the establishment of Lloyd's insurance market. Most people who came to patronize the coffee houses were not businessmen, however, and a new coffeehouse culture began to emerge, characterized by lively and open conversation and discussion of events of interest, with the news sheets and newspapers of the day being available to read. Indeed, one mainstay of coffeehouse culture was the collection and exchange of news. The availability of news sheets was another element in the developing public sphere, of course. Let me add that in addition to the increasing provision of news sheets and newspapers for patrons to read, in many coffee houses discussion of the latest news of the day was a regular feature, and for some patrons this was a major attraction. The Civil War of 1642-1651 had politicized many, and widespread political debate continued throughout the Restoration period under Charles II. Coffee houses provided a convenient place for people of varied social backgrounds to discuss both the general news of the day and more specific political issues. Unsurprisingly, given the political tensions in Restoration England, political discussions and arguments were not uncommon. Informed political conversation was no longer the preserve of the elite. Equally unsurprisingly, in 1675, King Charles II, who reigned from 1660 to 1685, and had long been suspicious of the coffee houses as centres of subversive gossip, tried to have them closed, but backed down in the face of opposition, and they flourished, their numbers multiplying rapidly by the early 18th century. Early 18th century observers often remarked on the large number of coffee houses and their lively culture. Thus, in 1714, the anti-Jacobite Scottish spy, John Mackay, marvelled at the open and convivial nature of coffeehouse culture, where people of different social backgrounds and political persuasions were welcomed into the discussions that characterized these places, and people talked freely without regard to differences of social rank. Again, in 1726, the Swiss nobleman César de Saussure noted that even workmen habitually began their day in London by going to a coffee house to read the latest news, and was amused that the shoeblacks and other workers pored over the newspapers and discussed the latest political events. The coffee houses attracted a wide clientele, from bewigged gentlemen to the more affluent craftsmen and workers. The poor would not have been able to afford the one-penny fee required for entrance and coffee, but a wide range of other people could. Matthew Green suggests that by 1700, London's male population was in the region of 287,000, and of these, some 30 to 40% might be classified as middle class. I am assuming that his definition of middle class here means essentially neither very rich nor very poor. I note that according to a pamphlet on the rules and orders of the coffee house, published in 1674, no coffee house patron was given preeminence on the basis of social rank, so that gentlemen might find themselves sitting next to shopkeepers. At that time, it is reported that it was common for people to talk with strangers, and initially, when most coffee houses sat their patrons around long tables, to join in their conversations as well. Only from the 1740s did separate booths begin to appear, allowing more private conversations. There were, however, particular coffee houses which attracted like-minded groups for particular purposes, such as literary discussion. or groups such as politicians, scientists, or other scholars. Some also served as places for rakes to gamble or meet up with prostitutes. An early literary coffee house was Will's in Covent Garden, where the poet John Dryden presided over discussions. Similarly, in the early 1700s, Button's Coffee House on Russell Street near Covent Garden, presided over by the essayist and playwright Joseph Addison, provided a forum for literary debate. Addison even installing a marble's lion head into whose gaping mouth anyone could place letters, poems, and stories for possible inclusion in his weekly paper. Nearby, the Bedford recorded judgments on the latest plays. Coffee houses could provide public criticism and judgment, including one in Covent Garden that actually had a theatrical thermometer to record the patrons' assembled judgment on the latest plays and performances, or another in Westminster that shamed politicians if their speeches were tedious or ineffectual. Coffee houses were generally patronized only by men, which sparked a women's petition against coffee in 1674, in which the heathenish new drink was presented as making men effeminate. A vulgar reply, men's answer to the women's petition against coffee, asserted that it was wine and ale that made men impotent. By contrast, coffee made them more virile. Thank you for listening.